I'm Paul, and I was wondering from both of y'all, how is faith a mode of knowing as opposed to reason or rational logic?
Knows you better. A very bright psychiatrist who wants to use you as a case study and interviews you 10 hours a day for a month and writes a 3,000-page book about every in and out of your personality but doesn't care about you. Or your best friend who's not terribly bright but loves you dearly and would give their life for you. The deepest kind of personal knowing is love and trust.
Is that what you would define as faith?
Yeah,
Okay.
faith is trust.
I would say, there are different conceptions of faith that people have. Sometimes they have in mind a completely irrational faith. If that's the case, I think it doesn't provide any knowledge. Some people like Aquinas have in mind a more rational faith that's guided by reason. If your beliefs are guided by reason, I think that's the way to get knowledge.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm Sarah. Dr. Keith, I have a question for you. You say that you don't care if God exists, then why are you standing up here arguing that he doesn't?
Because I think there are good reasons for believing that there is no God. When I say I don't care whether God exists, what I mean is that I don't feel any strong personal commitment one way or the other. But I don't mean to say or suggest that it isn't an important question or worth discussing, right? I'm just saying personally, one way or the other, whatever. But in terms of being a question we should think about, I think it's a great question we should all think about.
I'd actually like to return to Pascal's wager and get a response from either one of you. Houston Smith suggests that there have only been two people in history who were not asked, who are you, but what are you? Jesus and Buddha. And so with regard to this Pascal's wager, I wonder how the Buddha might have responded. And I propose that at least there's a chance he would have seen a lot of value in that less discussed possibility. What if there is no God and I choose to believe there is no God? When Buddha was asked, who are you or what are you, he said, one who is awake. And I propose that if there is no God and I choose to believe there is no God, then I might be one who is awake.
That's self-evidently true. If X is true and you choose to believe X, then you're right, and that makes you more awake. But I think you need a separate Pascal's wager for each religious claim. So the Buddhists could also use Pascal's wager and say that awakeness or enlightenment is so important that it's worth risking anything for. My argument there would be that what you risk for it is ordinary consciousness, which is a real risk, whereas what the Christian risks in trusting God as revealed in Christ is simply his own autonomy as being his own God, and that's a good thing to give away. Although Buddhism is, I think, a consistent philosophy, if I believed it, at least Theravada Buddhism, traditional Buddhism, I would cease to regard the world as a real theater in which real creatures really make choices and have real things to fear and real things to love. And I think that would be too much of a sacrifice. That would be like kind of a spiritual euthanasia. I would indeed kill the disease of egotism, but only by killing the patient of the ego.
I don't know if all Buddhists would agree with that.
They wouldn't. They wouldn't.
There was a statement made about where that the belief that Jesus says that every person will have to make a decision whether or not they believe in him as God or not. And the statement was made, well, if God was all-knowing and all-good, then there would be some souls on the planet that would die, and they would have been given a chance. They never were given a chance to know God. And y'all said, well, that doesn't even make sense. I mean, they died, and they never got a chance to know this all-loving, all-knowing, all-good God. See, that's my question, is how do you know that once they perish here physically, that their spirit or their soul or their eternal being is not confronted by Jesus. And he says, okay, I didn't, one of my little erroneous beings down there on the planet didn't get to you, but I'm giving you the chance now, okay? See, that's the error in that. I think that I would like to see y'all's response to that point. See, that's what mankind does. They make the mistake of thinking that we know more or we are God. We don't know nothing.
Let him answer.
Very simple answer to that. Very simple answer to that. There are no such creatures on this planet who have no knowledge of God. When Paul preached to the Greeks in Athens, they were pagans, they were polytheists, they were idolaters, they worshipped a lot of gods that didn't exist. Nevertheless, he said to them, there's also this God called the unknown God. I see an altar to him. That altar may have been actually cut by Socrates, who was a stone cutter. And he said, the God you are already worshiping in ignorance, I now declare to you. Now, if Jesus is God incarnate, that means that he is not merely a 33-year-long, 6-foot-high Jewish carpenter who revealed himself to a few hundred people, but is rather the Logos, the mind of God, the light that enlightens everyone who comes into the world. So everyone has a knowledge of God, however obscure. And God, if he's just, will judge us by the light we have, not by the light that we don't have.
In response to the question, on one standard Christian view, the whole point of life on earth is to come to know and worship God. And so if you accept that view, then waiting until you die kind of misses the point of life on earth. Now maybe you don't, and so that's where my argument is directed. Maybe you don't accept that view. Maybe you think that knowing God on earth is not a relevant issue, in which case my argument isn't, going to be relevant to you. I would point out that in assuming that knowing that God is going to reveal himself to you after you die, it's the same thing. I mean, you kind of, I thought, criticized me for assuming to know what God has planned or wants to do, but in the same sentence, you are making suppositions about what God wants or what God plans to do. I think anytime you discuss the issue of God, that's inevitable. It's not a question of whether or not you're going to try to understand the mind of God. It's a question of, what sort of understanding are you going to come to with regard to these issues?
Dr. Kreeft, in your 11th argument in your presentation opening up, you implied that moral wisdom is derived independently from rational thought, from the human heart, you said. And I wondered why the foundations are mutually exclusive.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? I said that moral wisdom is arrived at how?
You get it from the human heart instead of rational thought.
Not instead of, together with. But without both the heart and the head working together, I don't think you have wisdom. Wisdom is not just a feeling of the heart. Wisdom is not just a concept of the mind. Wisdom is an integrative virtue that holds all of you together.
Okay, thank you.
I'm an atheist, and I read the Bible quite often, but I'm also an ardent student of biblical history. And I wanted to know, are you familiar with any of the historical and archaeological arguments against the existence of God, that there is good historical and archaeological evidence that suggests that
I'd be very interested in that, because for 2,000 years, atheists have been trying to invalidate certain claims in the Bible by archaeology. Christianity is, of all the religions of the world, the most vulnerable to such scientific disproof, but it's never been done, as far as I know.
Well, let's say for Paul, for instance, Paul never met Jesus. He had a vision of him on the road to Damascus.
Right.
Does that really count as proof of Jesus' divinity?
No.
I just don't see that the theology that he developed would be indicative of Jesus if he never really met him.
Well, that's a different issue from archaeology. What archaeological discoveries?
Okay, let's say the city of Jericho. The city of Jericho was not some great city that had a great wall around it, as it's mentioned in the Bible. And
can you prove that it didn't have a wall?
Yes, we can. Actually,
There,
archaeologists have found that.
there are fossils of the absence of a wall
Yes,
somehow?
Archaeologists have uncovered Jericho and have found that there was no Great Wall. Like a lot of claims of the Bible are simply not true. They're fictitious. So I can't imagine you can say God exists if the book that is supposed to be written and inspired by him is, quite frankly, a lot of contradictions. I just don't understand that.
So you're arguing that Jericho couldn't have had walls because it was too small?
No, it was a small, semi-nomadic community of farmers. They had a central structure of houses around it, but there was no Great Wall that was uncovered in any of the excavations, and they've excavated it back to about 2500 BC. There are a lot of claims like this in the Bible, but they're fictitious. They're made up. Like, how can you say that God exists when
Well,
the
I'm
book
not.
that he is...
This interests me because here we have hard data.
There's a lot of it, actually.
I'm not a fundamentalist, so I'd be willing to open my mind to the hypothesis that there are mistakes in the Bible's text in copying.
Sure.
Numbers, letters, cities, etc. That, it seems to me, is not part of the essential claim of the Bible. If Jericho was really called Ur, or if it was really a slightly smaller city than we thought, does that really disprove the existence of God? That's a bit of a stretch.
You also say that, you also say that God is all-powerful and all good, but he does some pretty terrible things in the Bible, and I just don't understand how you can support that.
Read the Chronicles of Narnia. Aslan is also a terrible lion, but he's good.
I would like to know if you believe in justice or not, and if you believe in that, how is it gonna be maintained without without existence of God, a just God?
Do it again.
I would like to know if you believe in justice.
Yes.
And if you believe in that, how is it gonna be maintained without existence of God, a just God?
You mean, how are we going to be sure everyone gets what they deserve?
Yes.
We won't.
So there is no justice in this world.
I think there is some justice, and it gets meted out by the court system occasionally. We mete it out to each other.
So what if I don't have the power that get my right? Who is gonna get that for me?
Who's going to violate your rights?
For example, if the president of the America kill my brother, how am I gonna get my right?
You
Because
probably
I don't have that power.
You probably won't, unfortunately.
So there is no justice in this world.
There's some justice, but there's no guarantee it's going to happen. People get away with bad things all the time,
So you don't
and
believe-
that's, I think, a fact of life.
Wouldn't you wish that weren't so, though? Yeah. Don't you wish there were a God?
Yeah, but I want the real world over wishful thinking.